Okay, so we're going to look at Chapter 1. Part 1 deals with developing leaders as opposed to Part 2, which deals with leadership development. And those are two very different things, as we talked about in the last lecture. Okay, so Chapter 1, Leader Development Systems. Now, here's an outline of what we're going to be talking about. Tools for assessing the organization's need for effective leaders. Leader segments. Methods of development. Climate for development. Leader development beyond formal organizations, and then finally we'll wrap up and conclude with kind of a metaphor for how we should be thinking about the context of leadership. So the purposes served by leader development include performance improvement, and that's kind of obvious. What we want to do is make sure that people are better leaders so that they can lead their people more effectively, which can improve the bottom line. Then succession management, which is just being concerned about what's going to happen when those folks in the C-suite retire and move on. Who do we have to take their place and do it well? And finally, organizational change, and there's that word change again. And again, it's important to remember that any time that you're dealing with change, you're dealing with leadership, not just management. An organization needs leaders who are highly effective in their current roles, so it invests in strategies and tactics to develop leaders. Now, this is common sense. And we need to make sure that we're investing in leaders, making sure that they have the tools that they need to be successful. Leader competency models are important. That is, we have to have some kind of understanding. Sometimes these are called standards of leadership of what we're trying to get to when we're dealing with leaders. We also have to be able to measure, so we need leader metrics. Some kind of forum to review leader effectiveness, team meetings or some other forum. And then finally, we need to develop a development strategy, and these are all component parts of the tools that we need to assess for effective leadership. One of the most consistent findings in studies of organizations that are most effective at developing leaders is commitment and involvement of senior management. Now this is obvious, this is important. Does it mean that you can't be effective if you're trying to do this within your department and you don't have the support from above? It doesn't mean that you can't, but it makes it very difficult. But if you have commitment of senior management, it'll be much more likely that you'll be effective in developing leaders. Leader segments. So when we talk about leader segments, we can look at it in organizational levels. How many directors have some kind of, or how many directors do we need? That, you know, what are we lacking? How many managers? How many executives do we need? And so we wanted to develop particularly high potential leaders so that we can make sure that we have leaders in place. Now that does not mean that we don't look at everyone. We want leadership to be pervasive within the organization, but we need to prioritize, obviously. Social identity groups we'll talk about in Chapter 5 at some length, so I'm not going to talk about that here. But how many leaders do we need in marketing function or within the particular business unit or geography in, say, the European or Asian division, or local leaders in the Asian division in this particular country? Do we have local leaders on the ground, not just from corporate here, but on the ground who are leaders that people can look to? Methods of development include things like developmental relationships. There's that word relationships again. Developmental assignments. And that's also going to be very important. Feedback processes, formal programs, self-developmental activities. Now, the research shows that developmental assignments and relationships are the most developmental. So that's you're taking on a tough challenge, assignments, and that you have support from relationships, rather, your Obi-Wan to your Luke Skywalker, somebody who can come along and be a mentor or a coach and help you along the way. That could be your manager or it could be somebody else, but somebody to help you along. These two things are very important. Now, so we have developmental relationships. Again, mentors, professional coaches, manager as coach, peer learning partners, social identity networks, communities of practice. Those are the kinds of relationships that can help in development. Developmental assignments. So you take a different job or you rotate through different parts of the job, or you expand your work assignments, you engage in action learning projects, or perhaps it's a role outside of work. For example, I was on my local school board, and while that does not directly apply to what I teach about leadership and management and organizational behavior, it had a substantial role in helping me see how bureaucracies actually function. If you're working with a local United Way campaign, for example, you're getting other experience managing volunteers somewhere. Feedback processes, performance appraisals, 360-degree feedback or assessment centers. We need to get feedback so that we can know how to course correct. formal programs such as university programs. Look, the beauty of what you're doing here in a university program is that it feeds into your developmental assignments. So the university program should be teaching you to develop relationships and work on additional assignments. If it's worth its salt, it should be teaching you that. Not just saying, hey, if you've read this book and taken this test, you're a leader, because it doesn't work that way. You have to experience leadership to do it, okay? So a good university program is going to be one that is going to require you to experience it. Okay, and then finally, self-developmental activities. You can read, you can go to professional conferences, for example, but they do not take the place of experience. Both HR professionals and line managers report that assignments and relationships are the most frequent and richest source of leader development. Let me repeat that. Line managers and HR professionals agree that assignments, that is, that you're doing something, and relationships, that's support, okay, are the most frequent and richest source of leader development. A major conclusion of the Top Companies for Leaders research, a Hewlett Associates project that seeks to identify factors that allow financially successful organizations to consistently produce great leaders, is that these companies place a high value on leader programs. Again, this is not, I'm not telling you anything new. So the financially successful programs that have great leadership place a high value on these programs. It's like telling you, if you want to be physically fit, eat well and exercise. This is obvious, but sometimes we try to get the results without actually, engaging in the things that we need, placing the high value on leader programs. Climate for development. So when we're dealing with climate, we need to look at a few things, such as priorities of top management. That has to be part of the climate. Recognition and rewards have to be aligned. You have to communicate well. You have to have efforts to track and measure, that is the metrics. And you have to provide resources and have skilled employees in order to have a climate where you can development. Now, what's the difference between climate and culture? Climate is how members feel about the organization in a short-term kind of function. Culture is the longer term and lasting set of expectations. So for example, let's use I drew this from the U.S. Army Field Manual on Leadership, FM 6-22. But let me paint a slightly different picture. The culture of the United States Marine Corps is we just need a few good men and we can do pretty much anything, right? That's the culture of the Marine Corps. The climate, however, is when a new commander takes command. Do they feel like this guy really knows what he's doing, or is he something that may not work out? There's a difference between short-term climate and long-term culture. Now, I want to show this clip as an example of how this works. This is Obama talking in 2009 about his jobs creation plan, and then I'll discuss this in a moment.
I have already directed my economic team to come up with an economic recovery plan that will mean 2.5 million more jobs by January of 2011. A plan big enough to meet the challenges we face that I intend to sign soon after taking office. We'll be working out the details in the weeks ahead, but it will be a 2-year, nationwide effort to jumpstart job creation in America and lay the foundation for a strong and growing economy. We'll put people back to work rebuilding our crumbling roads and bridges, modernizing schools that are failing our children, and building wind farms and solar panels, fuel-efficient cars, and the alternative energy technologies that can free us from our dependence on foreign oil and keep our economy competitive in the years ahead. These aren't just steps to pull ourselves out of this immediate crisis. These are the long-term investments in our economic future that have been ignored for far too long. And they represent an early down payment on the type of reform my administration will bring to Washington. A government that spends wisely, focuses on what works, and puts the public interest ahead of the same special interests that have come to dominate our politics. I know that passing this plan won't be easy. I will need and seek support from Republicans and Democrats, and I'll be welcome to ideas and suggestions from both sides of the aisle. But what is not negotiable is the need for immediate action.
Okay, now I know that seems like a weird juxtaposition, but it actually flows very nicely as kind of a metaphor for the way that you need to be thinking about leadership development in your organization. Now, what President Obama was just talking about was the need for these programs that I'm going to take this step and that step and the other step that's going to create these jobs. But wait a minute, the government doesn't create jobs. Or let me put it this way. The government can only fairly ineffectually create jobs. What the government needs to do is provide the context. Remember, that word is very important. The context where job creation from entrepreneurs that are not directed by Washington, but on their own initiative can go out and enter the marketplace. So you want to create the context. So we don't want to program, we want to process. Same thing in your organization. You do not want just a leadership program. You want a process that frees people to be as engaged in leadership at every level possible, so that not just identifying the top performers, but so everybody can be involved, so that everybody has ownership. And that's going to be fundamentally important to your success as a leader. Now, let's wrap up in a conclusion. An organization's leader development system also needs to be aligned with efforts to develop and enhance its leadership culture. Remember, culture is long-term. It's leadership culture, and it has to be aligned. Okay, so the leader development system also needs to be aligned with efforts to develop and enhance its leadership culture. So you need to make sure that you're getting everybody kind of involved in the process, where, you know, instead of just saying, okay, top management, hands down, you know, this is our plan of where we're going next. Wouldn't it be much better if you had direction, alignment, and commitment? And you could say, guys, what do you think? Where we want to go there. We all know that, but how do we get there? And then you could get all kinds of ideas, because you're not just trying to control everybody's ideas or control everybody and do it just your way. No, solicit that leadership from the rest of the organization. Now, a lot of other chapters are going to talk about that, so I'm going to stop right here. Thank you for your time, and I'll talk to you in Chapter 2.